הטסט השם מחייב פירוש הזה.
אבל הרשב"ם חולק בפירושו השני.
Animus Stella, Corpus.
Today's video is a purely scholarly and historical investigation. My aim is not to promote any particular belief or advocate for any mystical tradition. Rather, I intend to analyze an ancient spiritual system that has been discussed and debated for centuries. Kabbalah is an esoteric mystical tradition within Judaism, focused on exploring the inner meanings of the Torah and the nature of God. Historical records show that written Kabbalistic texts, such as the Zohar, emerged in the 12th and 13th centuries in Spain and Provence. However, many Kabbalah scholars and tradition-minded practitioners maintain that its wisdom predates these texts, existing as an oral tradition passed down from Moses or even earlier prophetic figures. This oral dimension emphasizes continuity across generations and the transmission of mystical insight long before formal documentation. To understand the depth of this tradition, we must look at its linguistic foundation. In Hebrew, the word Kabbalah literally means receiving. Welcome to Understanding the Word. I'm Pastor Najam. This implies that the knowledge is not invented but received through a chain of transmission. The Sefer Yetzirah, or Book of Creation, is one of the earliest known texts, describing creation through symbolic letters, numbers, and mystical concepts. It posits that the universe was created through the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet and the 10 primordial numbers. Later, the Zohar, attributed to Moses de Leon, expanded these ideas into a more elaborate mystical philosophical framework, often using allegory to explain the relationship between the finite human and the infinite creator. It is important to note that historically, Kabbalah was reserved for scholars deeply versed in Torah and Jewish law. According to historians, this restriction aimed to prevent misinterpretation and ensure proper understanding. Traditionally, a student had to be 40 years of age and stable in their character before even approaching these texts. Kabbalah's focus was spiritual insight, not magical control over others. At the heart of Kabbalah is the Tree of Life, or Etz Chain, representing the 10 Sephirot, or divine emanations, through which God's attributes are expressed in the world. Scholars emphasize that these Sephirot are understood as aspects of God's manifestation, not magical instruments. They represent a map of the soul and the cosmos, moving from the crown of divine will down to the physical kingdom. The concept of Ein Sof, the infinite and unknowable God, is central. It suggests that before God manifested any attributes, He existed in a state of absolute infinity that the human mind cannot grasp. Practitioners aim to understand the divine through meditation, ethical conduct, prayer, and study. Kabbalah emphasizes moral refinement, spiritual elevation, and the pursuit of wisdom. A distinction exists between theoretical Kabbalah, which is philosophical, mystical, and ethical reflection, and practical Kabbalah, which involves rituals, symbolic acts, and sometimes amulets. Historical records show that even renowned Kabbalists like Rabbi Isaac Luria cautioned against practical Kabbalah for all but the most advanced students. Experts argue that misuse or superficial engagement could lead to spiritual distraction or misunderstanding. These practices often involve divine names and ethical intent, not demonic forces. One famous example is the legend of the Golem of Prague, which, while folkloric, reflects the idea that mystical knowledge carries immense responsibility. Kabbalah scholars argue that misunderstanding practical Kabbalah has contributed to the misconception that the tradition is black magic. In reality, the goal was tikkun olam, or the repairing of the world, through spiritual acts of devotion. Kabbalah draws primarily from the Hebrew Bible, or Tanakh. Its aim is to explore hidden layers of meaning in sacred texts rather than to replace or override biblical teachings. A foundational reference is Ezekiel's vision of the divine chariot, known as the Merkabah. Scholars argue that the complex structure of the chariot, including the 4 living creatures and the wheels within wheels, symbolizes layers of divine emanation and the dynamics of spiritual reality. Historical Kabbalists interpreted this vision as a roadmap for the soul's ascent toward God. Meditation on the Merkaba was intended to cultivate spiritual awareness, ethical reflection, and reverence for divine order. Experts emphasize that these mystical exercises were never intended for supernatural manipulation, but rather for profound contemplation. The practice of gematria, or numerological interpretation of Hebrew letters, further illustrates this scholarly approach. By analyzing numerical values of words and phrases in the Torah, Kabbalists sought hidden patterns and correspondences in the text. For example, the Hebrew word for love, ahava, has the same numerical value as the word for one, echad. To a Kabbalist, this suggests that true love and divine unity are essentially the same. While critics argue that numerology could distract from the plain meaning of Scripture, scholars maintain that gematria was an interpretive tool, not a form of magic. Its purpose was symbolic understanding and spiritual insight, linking letters, numbers, and divine attributes in a contemplative framework. Historical records reveal that Kabbalah was met with suspicion by some religious authorities. During the Middle Ages, Christian and Jewish communities alike questioned the esoteric practices of Kabbalists. Some feared that meditation on mystical symbols, or the use of amulets and divine names, could resemble forbidden magical activity. This was a period where the line between natural philosophy, mysticism, and magic was often blurred in the public imagination. Even within the Jewish community, authorities such as Rabbi Isaac Luria emphasized strict guidance for engaging with practical Kabbalah. He warned that without rigorous study, ethical discipline, and spiritual maturity, mystical exercises could lead to misunderstanding, distraction, or ethical missteps. Scholars argue that this internal regulation reflects the seriousness with which Kabbalah was treated historically, countering claims that it was intended as black magic. The evolution of Kabbalah also saw the rise of Hasidism in the 18th century, which sought to make these mystical concepts accessible to the common person through joy, prayer, and emotional connection to God. This movement shifted the focus from complex intellectual systems to the internal spiritual state of the believer, further distancing the tradition from any association with dark arts or coercive magic. While many Kabbalah scholars highlighted spiritual insights, critics, especially traditional biblical scholars and conservative theologians, raise concerns. They argue that Kabbalah's use of numerology and symbolic letter interpretations could distort the original biblical message. Some maintain that mystical speculation risks diverting practitioners from the core biblical focus on faith, ethics, and service. There is a concern that focusing too much on the secret meanings can lead to a neglect of the literal commandments and ethical obligations found in the Scripture. Thus, objective analysis recognizes both appreciation for the tradition and legitimate critical concerns. This dual perspective helps viewers understand why Kabbalah has been both revered and questioned for centuries. It is essential to clarify that this discussion is historical and scholarly, not an endorsement of any practical Kabbalah exercises. Experts emphasize that practical Kabbalah has always been controversial. Renowned mystics warn that engaging in these practices without deep study, ethical grounding, and spiritual maturity could be misleading, confusing, or spiritually hazardous. The aim of presenting practical Kabbalah here is informational, not promotional. Today, Kabbalah is often portrayed superficially in popular culture, as mysterious, exotic, or magical. Celebrity endorsements and simplified books have amplified the misconception of black magic. Modern marketing often strips the tradition of its rigorous ethical and legal Jewish framework, presenting it as a self-help tool or a source of miraculous power. Scholars stress that authentic Kabbalah emphasizes ethical conduct, study, and spiritual reflection. Understanding the historical and theological context clarifies that black magic labels are misunderstandings born out of a lack of context. My intention is not to promote Kabbalah, but to present a scholarly, historical, and theological analysis of a spiritual tradition debated for centuries. On one side, Kabbalah is seen as a spiritual treasure. On the other, critics and conservative scholars have labeled it controversial or even dangerous. Historical evidence, textual study, and scholarly analysis suggest that Kabbalah is a mystical, ethical, and spiritual system. Misunderstandings arise from fear, superficial interpretation, or sensationalism, not from the tradition itself. It is important to separate historical and spiritual facts from myth. Kabbalah invites careful study, reflection, and ethical practice. It is not inherently magical or sinister. Viewed within historical and scholarly context, Kabbalah emerges as a path of spiritual insight and moral refinement, not manipulation or occult practice. The real danger is not Kabbalah itself, but misinterpretation. Fear of the unknown can create myths, but careful study uncovers a tradition devoted to divine connection, ethical refinement, and spiritual enlightenment. To understand Kabbalah is to approach the infinite mystery of God with reverence and wisdom.